Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. I need to talk about something that happened yesterday that I believe is the most shocking corruption case in American court history. Something so unbelievable that it sounds like a movie story, but it's completely real. On January 29th, 2026, the Federal Bureau of Investigation announced they arrested 28 judges across 6 states. But this is not a story about judges taking bribes or making unfair decisions for money. This is a story about judges who were living two different lives. Judges who worked in courtrooms during the day and ran huge drug selling operations at night. Judges who were not just corrupted by drug gangs, but who were actual drug gang leaders themselves. According to federal prosecutors, these 28 judges together controlled drug selling operations, making over $3 billion every year. They weren't taking orders from drug gangs, they were giving the orders. They weren't protecting drug gang operations, they were running the operations. They used their positions as judges to protect their criminal businesses, to get rid of competition, and to build drug empires that worked across multiple states and countries. This is a story about the worst abuse of judge power, about how some of the people we trusted to uphold the law were actually the ones breaking it on a huge scale. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened and what it means for justice in America. Let me start with the basic facts of what federal authorities announced yesterday. On January 29th, 2026, FBI agents executed arrest warrants at the homes and offices of 28 judges across 6 states: California, Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, Nevada, and Florida. These arrests were coordinated to happen at the same time at 4 a.m. to prevent any judge from being warned and possibly running away or destroying evidence. According to the Department of Justice, these 28 judges range from municipal court judges to superior court judges, with the majority being county-level judges who handled serious criminal cases. They served in different places, some in major cities and some in smaller communities along the southern border and in major drug distribution centers. The lead defendant is Judge Victor Maldonado, a 52-year-old Superior Court judge from San Diego, California. According to federal prosecutors, Maldonado was not just a corrupt judge. He was the leader of what the DEA calls one of the most sophisticated drug trafficking organizations in North America, and a network that brought in cocaine, methamphetamine, and fentanyl from Mexico and distributed it throughout the western United States. But Maldonado wasn't working alone. The indictment names 27 other judges who federal authorities say were part of this criminal organization. Some were regional leaders controlling specific distribution territories. Some managed financial operations and money laundering. Some handled enforcement and security. And all of them used their positions as judges to protect and advance their criminal enterprise. The charges against these judges include racketeering, conspiracy to distribute drugs, continuing criminal enterprise, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and murder for hire. These are the most serious charges in federal law, charges usually reserved for mob bosses and cartel kingpins. The possible sentences range from 40 years to life in federal prison. Federal prosecutors filed a sealed indictment that runs over 500 pages and represents the result of a 7-year investigation. According to that indictment, these judges controlled a drug trafficking organization that brought over 85 tons of drugs into the United States between 2017 and 2025, distributed those drugs through networks spanning 15 states, and made approximately $4.3 billion in revenue. The indictment describes how these judges use their judge positions as perfect cover for their criminal operations. During the day, they worked in courtrooms, hearing cases, making rulings, and sentencing defendants. At night and on weekends, they coordinated drug shipments, managed distribution networks, ordered enforcement actions against rivals, and laundered money through different businesses and shell companies. To understand how this happened, we need to understand how 28 individuals could be judges and cartel leaders at the same time. According to the FBI's investigation, this criminal organization was started in 2014, but most of the judges joined between 2016 and 2019. The organization was deliberately structured to recruit individuals with legal backgrounds who could either become judges or who were already serving as judges. Judge Victor Maldonado, the leader of the organization, had a background that federal investigators say explains his path. Maldonado grew up in a border community in Southern California. According to the indictment, he had connections to drug trafficking from a young age through family members involved in the business. But unlike others in his family who chose criminal careers openly, Maldonado chose a different path. He went to law school, became an attorney, built a reputation as a skilled criminal defense lawyer who successfully defended numerous drug trafficking cases, and eventually was appointed as a municipal court judge in 2010. He was later elevated to Superior Court in 2016. But according to federal prosecutors, Maldonado never actually left the drug business. Throughout his legal career, while he was publicly building his reputation as an attorney and judge, he was privately building a drug trafficking organization. His legal knowledge, his connections in the court system, and eventually his position as a judge gave him unique advantages in building a criminal enterprise. By 2014, according to the indictment, Maldonado had established connections with the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico and had begun importing drugs on a large scale. But he needed help managing and protecting an operation of the size he imagined. So he began recruiting. The recruitment strategy was sophisticated. Maldonado identified attorneys and judges who had money problems, who had shown questionable ethics in their legal practice, or who had personal connections to drug trafficking through family or community ties. He would build relationships with them, gradually revealing his criminal activities, and eventually offering them opportunities to join his organization. Some recruits were attorneys who Maldonado helped get appointed as judges, using his connections and influence in the legal community. Once they were on the bench, they were already compromised and already part of his organization. Other recruits were sitting judges whom Maldonado approached with offers of enormous money in exchange for using their judge positions to protect his organization. Once they accepted and began participating, they were fully invested in the criminal enterprise. By 2019, according to federal prosecutors, Maldonado had successfully recruited 27 other judges into his organization. These judges were strategically positioned across 6 states, mainly in areas important to drug trafficking. Border regions where drugs entered the United States, major cities where drugs were distributed, and transportation corridors where drugs were moved. The organization worked like a corporation with Maldonado as the CEO and the other judges serving in different leadership roles. Some judges controlled regional distribution networks. Some managed the financial side, including money laundering operations. Some handled security and enforcement. And all of them used their judge positions to advance the organization's interests. The operation was extraordinarily profitable. According to the indictment, between 2017 and 2025, the organization imported approximately 85 tons of cocaine, methamphetamine, and fentanyl from Mexico. They distributed these drugs through networks that reached 15 states, and they made approximately $4.3 billion in revenue, with hundreds of millions in profits distributed among the leadership. Now, let me explain how federal authorities discovered this operation and built the case that led to yesterday's arrest. The investigation began in 2019, but not because the FBI suspected that judges were running a drug trafficking organization. It began with a routine DEA investigation into drug trafficking in Southern California. DEA agents were investigating several mid-level drug distributors in San Diego and Los Angeles. Through wiretaps and surveillance, they identified who was supplying these distributors with drugs. The investigation led them to a larger distribution network that appeared to be importing large quantities of drugs from Mexico. What was unusual about this network was how well protected it was. Law enforcement attempts to get inside the organization repeatedly failed. Informants who agreed to work with law enforcement would suddenly disappear or refuse to cooperate. Surveillance operations seemed to be detected and avoided, and when arrests were made, defendants always had highly skilled attorneys and seemed to know exactly what evidence law enforcement had against them. DEA investigators began to suspect that the organization had someone inside law enforcement feeding them information. They put in place strict information security rules, limiting knowledge of their investigation to a small team and not sharing information through normal channels. In 2020, DEA agents successfully got inside the organization through an undercover operation. An experienced undercover agent pretending to be a corrupt law enforcement officer was introduced to mid-level members of the organization and eventually gained their trust. What the undercover agent discovered was shocking. In conversations with organization members, they casually mentioned that they didn't worry about law enforcement because we have judges who handle that. When the undercover agent asked what that meant, he was told that the organization was run by judges who could make legal problems disappear. At first, federal investigators thought this meant the organization had corrupted some judges through bribes. But as the undercover operation continued and the agent gained more access to the organization's leadership, the truth became clear. The judges weren't working for the organization. They were the organization. In early 2021, the undercover agent was invited to a meeting at a private ranch in Southern California. The meeting was attended by several individuals who the agent later identified as sitting judges. These judges were discussing drug shipments, distribution strategies, and dealing with law enforcement investigations. They weren't talking about protecting someone else's drug operation. They were talking about their drug operation. The undercover agent wore a recording device to this meeting and several later meetings. Federal investigators collected dozens of hours of recordings in which judges openly discussed drug trafficking operations, coordinated shipments, planned distribution strategies, and ordered enforcement actions against rivals and threats to the organization. By mid-2021, federal authorities had gotten court permission for extensive wiretaps on the phones of multiple judges. These wiretaps revealed the full scope of the operation. The judges talked regularly with cartel contacts in Mexico, with distributors throughout the United States, with money launderers handling financial operations, and with enforcers handling security and violence. The investigation revealed that these judges were using their judge positions in multiple ways to protect and advance their criminal enterprise. When members of their organization were arrested, the judges would use their connections to make sure cases were assigned to friendly judges, or would directly handle cases themselves. They would dismiss charges, exclude evidence, reduce bail, and give lenient sentences. They also used their positions to attack rival drug organizations. If a rival trafficker was arrested, judges who were part of Maldonado's organization would make sure that the prosecution was successful, that bail was set high, that all evidence was admitted, and that sentences were severe. They used their access to sealed court records and law enforcement information to stay ahead of investigations. They would learn about ongoing DEA operations, about informants working with law enforcement, and about evidence being gathered against their organization. This information allowed them to avoid law enforcement and eliminate threats. Let me explain in detail how this criminal organization worked with judges as its leadership. According to the indictment and evidence presented in court documents, the organization was structured in a hierarchical manner, similar to a corporation with Judge Victor Maldonado serving as the overall leader and the 27 other judges serving in different leadership roles. Beneath the judge leadership were several tiers of non-judge members. These included cartel contacts in Mexico who supplied drugs, transportation specialists who smuggled drugs across the border, warehouse operators who stored drugs, distributors who sold drugs to street-level dealers, financial specialists who laundered money, and enforcers who handled security and violence. The judges coordinated all of these operations. They met regularly both in person and through encrypted communications to discuss strategy, resolve disputes, and make major decisions. Some of these meetings took place at the private ranch where the undercover agent attended. Other meetings took place at seemingly legitimate legal conferences or social events where judges would be expected to interact. The drug importation operation was sophisticated. The organization had established relationships with the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico, which manufactured cocaine and methamphetamine in Mexican laboratories and produced fentanyl pills using precursor chemicals from China. The organization would purchase multi-kilogram or multi-ton quantities of drugs at wholesale prices in Mexico. The drugs would be smuggled across the border using multiple methods. Some shipments came through official ports of entry, hidden in commercial vehicles among legitimate cargo. Some came through tunnels that had been built beneath the border. Some came across remote desert areas using vehicles or even drug mules. Once drugs crossed the border, they would be transported to stash houses in Southern California, Arizona, or Texas. From these locations, the drugs would be broken down into smaller quantities and distributed to regional networks in different cities. The organization had distribution networks in Los Angeles, San Diego, Phoenix, Las Vegas, Dallas, Houston, Miami, and several other major cities. The judges who controlled regional networks would oversee distribution in their territories, manage relationships with local dealers, collect money from drug sales, and make sure that law enforcement investigations didn't disrupt operations. The financial side of the operation was complex. The organization made approximately $4.3 billion in revenue over 8 years. This money needed to be collected, transported, and laundered. The judges who managed financial operations established numerous shell companies, invested in real estate and legitimate businesses, and used different money laundering techniques to convert drug money into apparently legitimate wealth. Now, the enforcement side of the operation was brutal. According to the indictment, the organization ordered at least 37 murders of rival traffickers, informants, and others who threatened the organization. Judges who managed enforcement operations would order these killings, coordinate with hired enforcers to carry them out, and then use their judge positions to block investigations into the murders. Now, let me give you numbers that help us understand the scope of this operation. According to federal prosecutors between 2017 and 2025, this organization imported approximately 85 tons of drugs into the United States. That's 170,000 pounds, or approximately 10 to 12 tons per year, or about 875 pounds per month. This included approximately 35 tons of cocaine, 30 tons of methamphetamine, and 20 tons of fentanyl pills. Yeah, to put the fentanyl in perspective, 20 tons of fentanyl pills represents approximately 40 million pills, enough to kill hundreds of millions of people if every pill reached a user. The organization distributed these drugs through networks spanning 15 states, primarily in the western United States, but reaching as far as Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas. They had approximately 350 people working for them in different jobs, from high-level managers to street-level dealers. The financial scale is staggering. $4.3 billion in revenue over 8 years represents approximately $537 million per year, or about $45 million per month. While drug trafficking organizations have high costs, including purchasing drugs from suppliers, transportation, bribes to other corrupt officials, and enforcement, the profit margins are still large. Federal authorities estimate that the organization's leadership took home approximately $1.2 billion in profits over 8 years. The 28 judges together received approximately $800 million from the organization's profits over the period they were involved. That's an average of about $28.5 million per judge, though the amounts varied based on their roles and seniority. Judge Maldonado, as the leader, allegedly received approximately $150 million. The investigation also revealed the violence associated with the organization. Federal authorities have linked the organization to 37 murders, 67 attempted murders, numerous kidnappings and assaults, and widespread intimidation of witnesses and rivals. In terms of their judge activities, these 28 judges worked on approximately 12,000 criminal cases during the period they were part of the drug trafficking organization. Federal prosecutors are now reviewing all of these cases to find instances where the judges may have made corrupt decisions to benefit their organization or harm rivals. They've already identified over 600 cases where judges appear to have made decisions that directly helped the drug trafficking organization, including dismissing charges against organization members, excluding evidence, setting low bail, giving minimal sentences, and making favorable rulings in appeals. The seized assets from the 28 judges and other organization members total approximately $940 million so far. This includes luxury homes, vehicles, boats, aircraft, artwork, jewelry, cash, and stakes in different businesses. All of these assets will be taken by the federal government. So, what does this case tell us about corruption in our court system and about the power of drug money to corrupt even our highest institutions? First, I think we need to recognize that this case represents corruption at a level that goes beyond anything we've seen before. These weren't judges who accepted bribes to make favorable decisions. These were judges who were actively running a massive criminal enterprise while at the same time working in courtrooms and supposedly upholding the law. The level of hypocrisy and betrayal is almost incomprehensible. These judges took oaths to uphold the law. They wore robes that symbolized justice and fairness. They held the power to determine guilt or innocence, to take away people's liberty, to interpret the law, and they used all of that power to advance their criminal operations while pretending to serve justice. Every defendant who stood before these judges, whether connected to their organization or not, did not receive justice. Every case they heard was tainted by their corruption. Every ruling they made must now be questioned. The damage to the integrity of the court system is incalculable. Second, this case shows how drug trafficking makes so much money that it can corrupt even people who have successful, legitimate careers. These weren't desperate people with no options. They were judges with good salaries, prestige, and secure futures. But the enormous profits from drug trafficking were apparently too tempting to resist. When a drug trafficking organization can make $4 in $3 billion in revenue and distribute hundreds of millions of dollars to its leadership, it can attract people from all walks of life, including people we would expect to be beyond corruption. Third, this case shows how criminal organizations are changing and becoming more sophisticated. Traditional drug trafficking organizations recruit criminals and use violence and intimidation to operate. But this organization recruited lawyers and judges, used legal knowledge and judge authority to operate, and was far more difficult for law enforcement to find and fight. If drug trafficking organizations can successfully recruit and corrupt judges on this scale, what other institutions and professions might be at risk? This case should serve as a wake-up call about the need for stronger oversight and accountability in all areas of government and the justice system. Fourth, this case raises serious questions about judge appointment and oversight. How did 28 individuals with connections to drug trafficking get appointed as judges? Were there warning signs that were missed or ignored? What can we do to better screen judge candidates and monitor sitting judges? The judge appointment process is different by place, but usually involves background checks, reviews of legal experience, and evaluations by bar associations and judge selection committees. Clearly, these processes failed to detect that some of these individuals were involved in criminal activity or were vulnerable to being recruited into criminal organizations. So, where do we go from here? Kya and the 28 arrested judges will face trial in federal court. Given the extensive evidence against them, including undercover recordings, wiretap conversations, financial records, and testimony from cooperating witnesses, convictions seem likely. The sentences will be severe. Many of these judges will spend the rest of their lives in federal prison. All 28 judges have been immediately removed from office and will never serve as judges again. The places where they served are doing emergency proceedings to replace them and to review thousands of cases they handled. For the justice system more broadly, this case has started urgent discussions about judge screening, oversight, and accountability. Multiple states are already proposing laws to strengthen background checks for judge candidates, to require more extensive financial disclosure from sitting judges, to create stronger oversight mechanisms, and to make it easier to investigate suspicious patterns in judge behavior. The American Bar Association and different judge oversight bodies are doing comprehensive reviews of how this could have happened and what can be done to prevent similar corruption in the future. But beyond institutional reforms, this case should make all of us think about the corrupting influence of the drug trade and the importance of addressing the demand for illegal drugs that makes drug trafficking so profitable. As long as there is enormous demand for illegal drugs in the United States, there will be criminal organizations willing to supply that demand and willing to corrupt our institutions to protect their operations. We cannot simply arrest our way out of this problem. We need comprehensive approaches that address addiction, treatment, prevention, and the root causes of drug abuse. For the thousands of cases affected by these corrupt judges, for the victims who were denied justice, For the communities harmed by the drugs these judges helped distribute, the damage is deep and, in many cases, cannot be fixed. This is what happens when the people trusted to uphold justice instead destroy it for personal profit. I'll continue to follow this case as it develops. If you found this information valuable, please subscribe and share this video.